Welcome, LilyPod listeners and LilyTube viewers, to another episode. And we have some special guests here. One of these guests I have known a long time. We've gone back quite a ways. We've got Trace and Karen Tiberius. Now, when I first met Karen, she was McGee, and I used to do a little bit of help. It was shortly after my mission with the Orem High School debate team. We had happened to have gone to the same high school, but I was a few years ahead of her. Didn't know her when I was in high school, but I tried to help out a little bit with the team, and we had, as fate would have it, the same coach through high school. And Karen was the star of that team at that time. And so I would show up to tournaments and judge and things like that. And that's how I first met her. But, life kind of took us different places. We both married other people and didn't see each other until the advent of Facebook, I think, when, you start looking up all the old people that used to be friends, and bumped into her. And I don't remember exactly how, but anyway, we both got divorced at a similar time. Full disclosure, we dated for a short period, but basically Karen has always been a really good friend, and she described herself before we came on as being feisty. And that's true. She's feisty, but she's also fiercely loyal. One of the most fiercely loyal people I think I've ever met. When you're her friend for good. And that's kind of the way it is. And I think that's one of her best qualities. And I still consider her a friend and would trust her, in any situation, to be loyal and all that. So,
and for our listeners or viewers, we're going to be exploring marital dynamics, marital communication, especially in the realm of those who remarry later in life. And I'm really excited to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Well, and let me say this first. I met Trace, I think, shortly after they'd been married, and I haven't interacted with him a huge amount, but I remember thinking when I met him, yeah, Karen has found her person.
That's awesome.
And and I will say this too, I'm not gonna go into detail about this yet, because I'm gonna let them talk about this when we get there. But whenever I hear a couple say, they're engaged or something, and they say we've never had a fight, I think,
like, what's getting pushed down?
What is waiting for after the ring goes on the finger?
But you've been married 7 years, is that right?
A little over.
More, yeah.
And so and so maybe the title of this episode will be "We've Never Had a Fight," but because that's what they talk about, and I'm interested to explore this with them, because I think it's deeper than, we just have avoided the touchy subjects and things like that.
Right, which is fantastic for married couples and those who anticipate getting remarried one day, if that's what you want, is less conflict in your marriage. You
want something that isn't painful all the time. So we want to turn it over to Karen and Trace to start out with a little bit, and tell us your individual journeys, as well as your love story, and how the two of you kind of came together.
Go ahead, sir. Ladies first. Ladies first.
Well, I was married to my children's father for about 19 years, and we didn't have a very peaceful marriage. It was challenging. We were both feisty, I will tell you that much. And just got to a point where it just wasn't something that I was willing to continue with. Had some just challenging dynamics in our marriage, and we made the decision that we were going to go our separate ways. I was single for a while, and this part is not my favorite part to talk about, but I will say I had a brief second marriage where I found out that person was still married to someone else So coming from an LDS background, would never choose polygamy. So I would joke that I was one against my will, but once I found that out, I actually sought an annulment and was granted one. And I was pretty relieved about it. I did decide at that time that I said I would never get married again. And I had a bishop that challenged my attitude and told me that marriage was a commandment and that I needed to soften my heart on that subject. I was pretty resentful at that time, so I wasn't super open, but he told me that he wanted me to start attending the Alpine mid-singles ward. So I did it reluctantly, and I was open to dating, but and I did date some, but I just had stumbled across a YouTube video that was entitled, it was a TED Talk, How I Hacked Online Dating, and it was really interesting to me. And so I made a list of the qualities of somebody I would be willing to even date. And I made a decision that I would not date anybody who didn't measure up and score high enough for a date. So I made a list of all these qualities and assigned point values to them. And after I did that, Trace was the first person I went on a date with. He was the only one that scored high enough that I was willing to go out on a date with him. So, and we met on an LDS dating site. He kept showing up as my match, like repeatedly, and his profile was interesting to me. I thought he was handsome.
No, thank you.
Yes. And he said in his profile that he cooked rather than starved, which I
Still true.
to me he wasn't a fabulous cook, but I will say
Not a cook.
you're right.
I don't cook.
He cooks a little bit. He can make a mean snack tray.
Okay, that's assembly. I don't know if I can cook.
Now,
Yeah.
Trace, remind me where you're from originally.
Born in Georgia and grew up in Tennessee.
Yeah, I remember the accent came from somewhere down south, but anyway, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
No, that's okay. So I just shot him a quick message and said, it's just, since he had said he cooks rather than starves, I said, it's a shame you starve. I happen to be quite fab in the kitchen.
Yeah, Karen is a good cook.
It's one of the things I've kind of have a reputation around. And he instantly asked me out on a date, which was shocking. So,
You
so
didn't want to keep starving.
yeah, it's true.
I did the whole dating website thing too, and it just took too long. Ask the same question over and over again with somebody different. The same question, same
Cut and
question.
paste.
And it would take days. And I was like, we could do this in an hour at, soup and a sandwich or, a small non-committal lunch. And so if they piqued my interest, I just asked.
That's awesome. And there's actually two things that you did that we recommend in our Amazon bestseller, Intentional Courtship. One, Karen, you got intentional. You made a very clear decision about who you wanted and that you weren't going to waste time anywhere else. Like you were only going to go after what you did want. That's really awesome. And then Trace, you hopped right to it and you said, I know I want to get to know you. So let's just get to the date part.
Yeah, we always recommended no more than 2 or 3 at the most online chats before you get to a real date or at least a phone call, because people can go for months just wasting time, and it might be like Manti Te'o. He's chatting with a guy and thinks she's the love of his life.
Well, and it's also a false lead because you're doing all these chats with inconsequential data.
Right.
How many kids do you have? How long did you know them? How many this? How many boys versus girls? Okay, that's something you'll get to know later, but it's not going to tell you whether someone's a match. I mean, I spent a week, I think, chatting with somebody back and forth, all the questions. I literally had some of my questions and answers as scripts, cut and paste.
Oh,
You
yeah.
ask how many kids and their names,
That too.
paste, copy, paste, copy, paste.
Huh.
Go down
I
my
never
list.
thought of that. That would have saved me a lot of time.
It was always the same questions. And I was just like, okay. Then I literally would finally get to the point you go and meet them. They walk out of the car and you're like, yeah, you're not the one. I just don't feel any any connection with this person. And it's like, okay, well, now I got, I just spent 3 weeks building them up in my mind to something I thought it was going to be.
Right.
that
It's less pressure if you get to
Well-
the date part faster.
You can just tell when you're with somebody. Is there any
Possibility here. Yeah.
possibility? There's some, innate sense. I don't know what you want to call it, but
Seems
I
like you
just-
can also ask less surface level questions, like more intimate, like real questions.
You're missing 80% of the conversation, which is body language.
Right.
All I'm getting is what your kids' names are. And you're trying to even be somewhat secret and will only tell me the first name or there's something, and it's like, just go meet them.
Yeah, when I was internet dating,
Like
it was
that.
the same thing. It was like, let's get to it. If we think there might be a chance here after a conversation or two, let's just meet and find out. And I think there were a few people who would say, you're pushing it pretty fast, you're moving pretty fast. And I'm like, what did they do before people invented internet dating? I mean, they met somebody at a dance and got their phone number and then they went out. I mean, whatever it was, it wasn't like all of this hiding behind your computer screen. And I generally found out if someone was reluctant to meet, they were usually hiding.
Yeah, I mean, they get used to what they get used to. I mean,
Yeah.
some people do it because it's familiar, because it is kind of a new experience. I'd never done it before. Didn't know what the rules were, but it was unique. So that's why I just asked. It's
Yeah.
like, all right, you already meet the very top end, somewhat superficial, I used to put it in analogy. I forget what all my P's were. I think there were like 7 P's. It was their profile picture, proximity to how close they listened, how close they were, reading their actual profile, and kind of just moving down, like you were saying, with purpose. So you've already met I've looked at your picture, I've read your basic personality aspects. Now I need to just meet you to see if there's anything there.
Right. So maybe we can move over to just a little bit of your background. So how did you come to be on this dating website and eventually meet Karen? What was your background?
Well, you met in the ward, right?
No, we didn't. We met on LDS Planet, which
Oh,
doesn't
gotcha.
exist
Okay.
anymore.
I never did as heavily into what you would call the mid-singles program. I never attended a singles branch, ward, or whatever. I got divorced in Indiana.
Okay.
And after I got divorced in Indiana, I was like, okay, there's nobody in my ward that's basically single or stake for that matter. So I got on one of the LDS dating websites and I did a 200-mile radius in Fort Wayne. And within a 200-mile radius or 400-mile circle, there were 12 women that were on the same kind of a website. And I drove over 2 hours to date one lady for a while, and that didn't work out. And so I just said, I've got a business in Indiana. I've got a business in Utah. I get to see my kids every other weekend. And I basically just talked to my ex-wife when we made an understanding that instead of me doing every other weekend and then just sitting around for the rest of the time, that I actually go back to Indiana once a month on a Friday, see my kids for the weekend, pick her up from school, do everything she needs to do for anything all week long, another weekend. So I get 2 weekends in a row with the week in between, and then I fly back to Utah.
Like 50%.
Yeah, so it's a little closer to that, and it was just a lot more concentrated being a parent instead of just I pick them up Friday, drop them off Sunday, and see them for 4 hours on a Wednesday. Pick them
Right.
up Sunday. So
And how long were you married?
I was married 25 years,
And how many kids?
4.
So you had 4, and then how many did you have, Karen?
I had 4. One of the most interesting dynamics about us is our kids mirror ages almost exactly.
Yeah.
So our oldest 2 kids are about
Within a year.
they're like 6 months apart. The next 2 are 3 months apart. The next 2 are a year apart. And then we both had straggler babies where we had this big age gap between our bottom 2 kids.
Wow.
And those 2 girls are only a year apart. And
Yeah.
so it's like we were living this mirrored life in some ways. And our kids' ages we were in the same stage of life.
Yeah.
For both of us. And so I did have my kids pretty much 100% of the time. Their dad was not super active as a dad in seeing them. And so that was one of the things that he obviously would have had to accept and be willing to do as instantly full-time dad to kids that weren't his, and he handled it like a champ.
How was that going to parenting full-time from 50%?
Well, I guess the full formula would be going from 100% to 50% to 100%.
True. Yes.
So it's not like I wasn't unfamiliar with how to parent 100%.
How many years was it on 50%?
Yeah, like 3.
Okay.
So I guess my biggest leap forward in how to be a step parent was my stepdad. He gave just shy of a perfect example on how to be a stepdad. He was very accepting, very supportive, non-separating, because I come from a his, hers, and ours from the traditional terminology.
And it sounds like it was an inclusive environment.
Extremely. I mean, my mom had 7 from her first. He had 3 from his prior. Then to bring 7 kids and 3 kids together, and then they had 1 together later.
11.
So,
Wow.
11 kids. Now, part of it was my oldest brother, I think, was already in college, and my youngest brother was in 1st grade. So we had quite the age span. And then he had the real challenge because he went from basically his oldest child being 7 to his oldest child just coming back from his mission. So he was like 21. So he had the real challenge. So basically I just watched his example on how to do a lot of that. And it wasn't, I mean, it's a challenge. And that's, I guess, where you really want to get into the meat of how to do it is you have to learn the balance between parenting, but as a step parent, you don't get as much of the disciplinarian role. It's harder for the step parent to be the disciplinarian role.
Especially at first.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at first I was very hands off that way. The only time I'd ever really step in and correct her kids was when they were being sassy to her or whatever.
Which, after being a single mom for many years and dealing with that by myself, was very refreshing.
I mean, I can do a little more now because we've been together a long time. The kids love me and they trust me and all that. But you got
Right,
to
you have to earn it. It's
Yeah.
not built in from the diaper,
Right.
So an additional challenge that Trace had, and it speaks really highly of his character, is my oldest daughter is on the spectrum. She's fairly high functioning, but she's autistic, and she's quirky because of the autism. She's extremely OCD, and it's not like the good kind. If there's good kinds of OCD, she's not clean, she's a hoarder.
Mhm.
And so there are challenges that come with a child that has special needs. And on top of that, the prospect of, okay, this child is likely not going to grow up and move out and be on their own. She's likely going to be with us forever. She has actually ended up becoming quite independent. She's graduated from college. She has a very good job. She fully supports herself financially. She's 28, but emotionally she's more like 13. And so there's still a lot of guidance that has to happen with Haley along the way, and learning to deal with that child's special needs was something that he handled really, really well. He's super patient and way more patient than I am. Way more patient than I am. And so I think that is part of why we can handle those challenges together. And there were times when I think probably, because I think both of our former spouses had some misgivings, or trying to think of what would be the right word. They were not probably excited about a step parent entering their children's lives. And I think it's really natural for a birth parent to fill some territory there and want to protect their position as the parent. And it puts you in a position where you feel like, I can speak from my own perspective of that you have competition for your child's love in some ways, and that can be challenging. I remember my kid's dad got remarried relatively quickly after our divorce, and I remember my youngest child, McKenna, coming home from her dad's one day and saying how much she loved her stepmom, and that when she grew up, she was going to have two daughters, one named Presley and one named Michelle, which is her stepmother's name. And that was just like, it was like a knife in the heart with a twist, and I just smiled at her and said, I am so happy you love your stepmom. That is so great that you have someone else that loves you. Meanwhile, I'm dying inside. And I went in my room and cried.
Did you mean what you said?
I did.
How could you mean what you said, but also feel really devastated? Like, how did that go together for you?
I think it's never a bad thing if there's more people that love your child. I think that that's always a good thing. And my parents divorced when I was quite young, and I had some really not ideal circumstances growing up. My mom was married 5 times. Mm-hmm. And my dad was married 4. So I had lots of step parents that came in and out of my.
Was there a part of you that didn't trust that she'd necessarily stay in her life? Was that a
there's part of that I think is potentially there, but also, I think that at this point, they're still married. I think it's likely she will be in her life forever. Mm-hmm. But I do want the step parent to love my children. And I think that because it would be better for her. At the same time, to feel like my child may choose the step parent over me was the part that put me in my bedroom crying. Does that make sense?
And did that ever get resolved for you in terms of your relationship and being able to still be the mom?
Yes. Yeah. I don't have any fears about that now.
So it was kind of a temporary fear.
It was. And that was when I'd only been divorced a year. And so it was a strange experience for me.
Yeah.
My child.
I was spared that temporary grief. Not entirely. I did feel it. So I'm relating with what you're saying. Because my former spouse also got remarried quickly. But I met this woman in the interim, shortly after our divorce, who she was a stepmom to 4 kids, and then her husband died. And then the mom, being very jealous of her relationship with them, said, you never get to see them again. And she had to move out here to Utah and just start over completely. And she couldn't love them. And she said, if she'd only understand that love is additive and that all the love for her children is only good for them, she wouldn't feel like she needed to compete with me, and be jealous of it or take that away from them. She wanted to continue loving her stepkids, but the choice was just not there. And that love is additive concept has stuck with me all this time. And it really helped, I feel like, for me to say, like you did, sincerely to my kids, if you've got love there, that's good for you. And feel less of a need to have my relationship with them questioned.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean you're not going to feel it. Like, I think that's kind of what I feel like is coming out of this conversation with you and hearing your perspective, is that, harnessing the concept of love is additive, which, by the way, is a podcast we did. It's episode 107, if anyone wants to hear that, because sometimes we really need to have that philosophy in order to approach, like you said, that kind of that competition for your child's love with a little bit more maturity and a little bit more perspective.
I mean, my second wife cut off contact with my stepkids from that marriage too. And
that happens a lot.
I've never had an opportunity to even talk to any of them about it. And that's still hard for me, even though we weren't married very long. It was that brief second marriage, kind of like you had, but
yeah, but that's why we really feel strongly about the concept. And it sounds like you kind of already knew it, even though you didn't have a place that necessarily told you it, you just felt it.
My mom's third husband was a really kind man, and his name was Austin, and I really loved Austin. He was a really good dad to me, and he was actually my stepdad probably about the time, Jeff, that you and I met, because it was when I was a sophomore in high school, and he was really good to us. And I was really, really sad when they split up, and they were only married about a year and a half, and I stayed close to Austin until he died. I saw him often, and my mom hated it, and I didn't care. I didn't care because I loved Austin and he was good to me.
And so for you, you probably were like, no, if he loves me and I love him, this is good for me. And I can still love you, and we can still have a relationship if that's what we want to do. And
yeah, in fact, my youngest daughter, if she would have been a boy, she would have been Austin, because I loved him that much. And all of my children are named after somebody.
So your love is additive concept came through your own personal experience with stepparents.
Yeah, I had that wonderful stepdad. And then the man that my mom was married to, she married him after I actually had married my kid's dad, but was married to him until her death a couple of years ago. Very, very sweet, kind man too. And I just see him as additive too. And I think that's something that Trace experienced too. His dad was his biological dad was very complimentary of his stepdad. There wasn't a competition between those two. His dad was just a really kind man.
I don't think I ever heard my dad say anything bad, even about my mom, which is a trap I think a lot of people fall into, is saying opinions at the wrong time, or even carrying opinions that they need to drop. But and so he never said anything bad about her. And
so you also had an example of how to do divorce better than the standard "let's hate each other now."
Oh, my catchphrase is, "I'll divorce you before I hate you." I'm not gonna hate anybody. I don't do hate. I think it's too,
I love that.
It's too energy intensive, and you've only got so much. So
I want to get to that.
I want to get to that. Hate is too energy. What energy intensive is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think that's what I said. I've never said it before. I don't know what I said.
Well, actually, I want to get to that more in a minute. Before we leave the subject of love is additive, Karen, you knew and loved my son Henry back when he was kind of in his early teens, and you even said you related to him a lot. And he was killed this last August in a rock climbing accident. But I remember when his mom got together with the person she's married to now pretty early, kind of like you were describing your former husband got married relatively quickly too. I had a certain amount of resentment toward her, the man she's married to at first. I mean, it's like had all these thoughts about wanting to catch him in a dark alley and beat the tar out of him, stuff like that. Of course, I never did and never would. But I had those emotions, certainly. And I remember, though, there was a time when Henry was in his late teens, and we had a conference call, me and his mom and his stepdad and some grandparents, and we were talking about what to do about what was going on with Henry at the time. And Henry had always said, I'm never going to call him dad, he had some resentment toward him and things like that. And I found myself saying during this conversation, Henry, I don't want to hear you say, or that you have said to his stepfather, you're not my dad. If you're at his house, you've got to keep his rules. And honestly, it hurt me to say it. It was hard for me to say it, but I felt like it was in his interest. And sometimes parenting means you hurt because you have to hurt your kid in a way that they won't
Or
understand.
hurt your own ego while you're advising them in what's best for them. That isn't necessarily always what's best for your ego.
Right. But after Henry died in August, well, a year ago, August, his stepdad posted something on Facebook, and he just referred to him as my son, Henry. He didn't refer to him as my stepson or anything like that. And I can honestly say that didn't bother me. I thought, well, if this kid had two fathers that loved him and are willing to call him their son, I don't feel like I am diminished in any way.
But that took time to get there,
Oh,
right?
it took a while to
Just
get
like
there.
Karen was saying, within the first year, you're still really tender, you're still recovering from the divorce.
And
And then at Henry's funeral, when I came down from the stand after speaking, and I was conflicted about whether I was going to speak, honestly, because I didn't think I would get through it without bursting into tears, and I just decided I was going to do it anyway and just cry the whole way through it, which I did. But I came down from the stand at the end of the meeting. The first person that greets me is Henry's stepdad, and he gives me a big hug.
I was on the other side. If you come back down that side,
Yeah.
I just got the first hug.
Anyway, but I honestly can say now, I feel no malice toward him. He called recently and asked me for legal advice on something, and I was happy to help in whatever way I could. I have checked in on them from time to time and said, how are you guys doing? I know this is a hard time because it's the anniversary or whatever. And I don't think we have to hate each other when we've gotten divorced.
It does seem like that joint loss has brought a lot more compassion there.
Yeah, I think it's furthered
Yeah.
the process that it was already happening, but
Karen,
I'm glad to hear that. My oldest sister was killed in an accident when I was 20, and
your oldest sister?
my oldest sister was, and she was 28. She was married and had 2 children, and it was pretty tragic when it happened. And my parents did have the pretty typical 70s, 80s divorce. They did hate each other bitterly, and I did hear bad things from both of them about each other my entire growing up, and it really left me feeling responsible. It left me feeling like somehow things were my fault, and I never wanted to do that to my kids. I don't hate their dad. I don't wish ill on him. I don't want any of those things for them. But the contrast to your situation, Jeff, is even at my sister's funeral, my dad couldn't put it aside and literally told my mom in front of all his children that he hated her guts and would hate her till the day he died. And it was horrible for their kids to have that. We're in the midst of this tragedy and you couldn't put it aside even for that. And so I think that's really great that you guys
Doubles up the grief, doesn't it?
It did, but it taught me, I'm grateful for that example because it taught me how I didn't want to be divorced when I found myself in that situation. So my kids, I didn't tell them why we were getting divorced. If they wanted to come ask me when they were adults, they can do that. And I feel like we could have that conversation, and some of them have, and some of them haven't. My youngest daughter still doesn't know why. So, and I don't think it matters at this point. It's been 12 years.
Yeah.
Is that what you established, is like when you're an adult, you can come ask if you want?
I said, what I established with them was that adult conversations happen with adults. And this is between me and your dad. And you need to, I literally, my oldest daughter was 16, the one that's on the spectrum, but she's really, really intelligent. Just emotionally is where she's challenged. And she did ask me, and I said, I want you to still love your dad. And what's happening between he and I is between he and I. And this is not something that you have the power to either resolve or control. So I'm not going to burden you with that information, because for me growing up, I mean, I knew at 7 that my dad had girlfriends, and that's why my parents were divorced. And that was hard to know at 7. I didn't even understand what adultery was per se, but I was burdened with that knowledge. And I certainly was not going to do the same types of things to my kids, because I felt like it wasn't fair. And I think that I had challenges in my teenage years because of that I wouldn't have had I not been burdened with that. And so I just chose not to do it. And now it doesn't even matter. So why get into it?
I really love adult conversations happen with adults for the reasons that you mentioned, that kids can't resolve or control what happens with their parents. And that's such a wise perspective. And I can see how, Trace, you learned from a good example of a stepdad, and also a good example of divorce in terms of not being hateful, never saying a bad word. And Karen, you learned from kind of a harsh opposite, but you both learned what you wanted out of those examples. Yeah.
By the way, Karen is what she likes to call wicked smart.
She is.
So is
I'm not
Trace,
saying
by
she
the way.
refers to herself that way, but she is.
She certainly is.
I refer to myself as a turbo nerd.
As a what?
A turbo nerd.
Oh, a turbo nerd. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I want to get to the main subject, but I think we veered off, and I'm glad we did, because this was great conversation. But if you can finish up, like, what is your love story? How did you come together? I know Trace mentioned that you guys met on LDS Planet, and he was get right to it. So,
and you were both, it sounded like you were both intentional about what you were looking for.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
I think we both had already bullet pointed it out in different ways.
And read some of the same books and
Read
some of the
some
same articles. And
so you guys were both being intentional about your healing and everything at that time.
yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, even going back to the beginning, right after my divorce, I went and saw a psychologist, and I just said, how do I do this? I've never been divorced, and you don't get to ease into it. You kind of get to ease into parenthood. They give you a newborn, and it slowly grows before and you learn how to do it before it knows you're doing it wrong. And you start divorced, you're divorced. And so I went and talked to him. I went to a psychologist, I forget what he was, and just said, how do I do this? What matters? What doesn't matter? And he said, all right, tell me. And I had a whole list of things that were either bothering me or I was worried about. And I knew him. And so he knew my personality, and he just said, all right, matters, doesn't matter. What do you think of this? And I said, well, I kind of don't want you. He goes, well, then we can talk about it, but it really doesn't matter. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. And this is what you need to do. And I just said, all right, that's what I'll set out doing. And so that's kind of how I got into the healing and got into doing things with purpose. It's like, I don't want to meander and try to figure my way through the woods. I want to know where I am and where I want to go. And it's not always a straight line, but there is the best path. And that's kind of the path I tried to take in figuring it out. So I delineated out what I was looking for. And that's the thing I liked about online. When you talked about going to a dance, I can't look at somebody and know what phase of life they're in dance and what they're looking for, and whether they're 10 years older than me or 30 years younger than me.
Right. So you're talking about surface level stuff actually is deeper than just seeing someone physically. Like you
No.
at least know the basics.
Right. I like the fact that when on those websites, they would literally list, I have kids, they're either still at home or not still at home. I'm looking for this. I'm looking for, if someone's out there looking for people to hang out with, well, okay, if I decide to spend time with you, I'll know that's all we're doing is hanging out, and I can still go look for, a mate somewhere else. So I liked the purpose-driven aspect of it. And
I remember Karen saying to me once, and this is long after I dated her, but she was talking about meeting people, and they would say they just wanted to be friends and hang out. And her response was, I have enough friends. I'm looking for a husband, something like that.
right.
Um, I think it's good to be honest about that, honestly. You hear people kind of stealth dating, pretending, oh, I'm just interested in being friends. And it's kind of like dishonest. It's coming through the back door. It's trying to find love without risk.
Right.
That's my opinion.
No, I'd agree. That wouldn't make sense to me. I mean, you're not going to find what you're looking for, telling people you're not looking for it.
Right.
Nobody's going to help you find it if you don't tell them what you're looking for.
Right. And to somebody else that wants to be partnered, I mean, not necessarily to the first person that asks, but that wants to be happy and healthily partnered, they're not going to like the idea that you're just looking for somebody to hang out with. I mean, that person you hang out with is going to disappear as soon as they get married or whatever.
Right.
So I will tell you, this may seem a little bit superficial, but it really wasn't. It was actually pretty important to me. So I really like country music, and nobody I dated after I was divorced equally shared that love of country music. Like this guy right there. So
Like
that
you
was
used to go
awesome.
country dancing or swing dancing or something, right?
Yeah, I used to do that, and I really enjoyed it. And also Trace is a very good dancer.
Oh, well,
He's a very good dancer. But Trace's dad was actually a songwriter and did quite well writing country music songs. And he has a brother that is two brothers that are equally successful songwriters. And so we have enjoyed lots and lots of country music and concerts and things like that together, which was really, it may not seem like a big deal to some people, but sharing something like that you really love is actually pretty awesome. The other thing I will say that was this huge relief to me is that when I first saw him at our first date, he actually looked like his picture. And that was such a relief to me, because I can't even tell you the number of times that I would show up and the person was like, yeah, that was 50 pounds ago, or
Okay,
10
no,
years
to
ago.
Note to singles, authenticity means putting in a current picture.
Yes. So, and I was always somebody who I always only had pictures that were within the last year. I would not do old pictures because I felt like that was fake, and I wasn't going to be fake because I didn't feel like that was the way to be successful, is to be fake. So, that was really a relief to me. I can also say that I will give him kudos, because on our first date, I was full on in a neck brace because I had just had a cervical spine fusion literally the week before. And he didn't run after seeing me in this big collar.
That's love right there.
And then on our second date, this is the part that was funny, because I can only imagine what people speculate about, but I've teased him a lot that I knew I had to marry him because he took me to Garth Brooks on our second date.
I
I mean,
did.
holy cow, dream come true. I never thought I'd see Garth Brooks concert.
So
But
not
he
just
had-
you wanted someone who loved country music, but second date?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
It was kind of a higher risk second date. You wouldn't normally commit to that much on a second date, but you don't get to schedule concerts. They're either happening or they're not. And she's who I wanted to take. So I thought,
It
okay.
was the right
that's good.
timing.
I love 3 Garth Brooks songs, and I quote them sometimes.
So the funny thing is he had gotten some weird infection in
Yeah.
his arm. And so he was wrapped from wrist to shoulder in this big brace thing. And then I'm in a
Second
neck
date?
collar,
Mobilized.
and we're at Garth Brooks. So we're pretty sure
It just
everybody
looked like we were in a
joked.
car accident.
Yeah, so,
It looked like we had a car accident on our first date, if that was our second date.
We
Yes.
see how they handle conflict in their marriage.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Let's get to it. So
Yes.
how long did you date before you got married?
About 9 months.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you make an agreement before you got married that you were never going to fight?
No.
Not an agreement, just,
No.
there certainly was already a 9-month pattern.
Now,
But-
Okay.
isn't it true? And
How
I'm,
did you
I'm,
know though that wouldn't enter the picture later?
I'm remembering this from a long time ago, so if I remember it wrong, correct me. But I remember Karen saying that Trace had told her, "I will not fight with you." Is there something to that?
I don't think that
I
there
don't know
was
if
even
that's-
ever potential of it. We were just talking about our experiences and our previous marriages. And he's just like, yeah, I won't fight with you. And it wasn't even that we were on the verge of it. We just, I don't
know how it came about per se in the overall sense. I think it literally comes about, people say, well, you never fought. What are you suppressing? And I'm like, well, that's a misnomer. I didn't say we never disagreed. I didn't
Right.
say we never discussed to come to a conclusion or want to do two things 2 different ways. To me, fighting is disagreeing rudely.
Like
You
with
know,
contention and
contention and it's-
disrespect.
yeah, right. It's saying things to hurt. When you punch somebody, that's when you're fighting. You're trying to hurt them and make them submit. Well, we never tried to force someone into submission. I did not beat someone down so that they will agree with me. We just always discussed. We didn't always instantly agree. So we've had to discuss how to handle numerous situations, but it's through intellectual conversation, through intellectual debate, and presenting your case and actually listening. I think half the case of winning an argument is listening. And I only say argument. I think argument has a misnomer as well, that you think about attorneys arguing. Well, that just means they don't agree. That just means they want 2 different outcomes. It doesn't mean they're pure opposition and they have to hate each other. They're just weighing your argument against my argument and which is heavier.
Were you a debater too?
Not in any formal sense, but
He's probably been schooled in the school of Karen, yeah?
he's actually he's kind of shy by nature, but he is very, very, very intelligent. So he would have been very good at it if he would have been able to get over that shyness part. He probably would have been the best.
So we came in
that
kind of
ever
as a
was.
natural, and then Karen, you
Yeah.
have the debating skills, and then you kind of grown that together.
I think I'm literally just shy of 2 things in one bucket. I think I was growing up one way in the South. And then I was literally taken out of the South and put in the most northern you could be put in, which was Chicago, Illinois. You know? So I spent my first half lived on a 40-acre farm in the South. I spent from 14 to 20s in a northern town. So it's when people say, well, what do you like? I say, well, I love country living, but I want to be near stuff. And I like debating, but I am shy, but I'll talk to strangers everywhere I go. Just this weekend, we had a wedding and someone asked my stepdaughter, McKenna, says, oh, is that his daughter? And they're like, no, that's not his daughter. And he goes, oh, well, he's just talking to him. It's like, oh, Trace will talk to anybody.
He does that all the time.
So he does that all the time. So I'm kind of.
You're not
different.
shy in all the ways, just in some ways.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's a lot of things when people say, oh, you're shy. Well, that just means I don't want to take my personal life. It doesn't mean I won't talk to you. It doesn't mean I won't interact.
So more like private.
Yes, yeah, that's probably true.
And I think it's, let's see, when they say someone's either extrovert or introvert, I think extrovert or introvert really should be defined by where you get energy from and where you spend energy doing. Not that I won't do one or I won't do the other. I'm more introvert that I regain energy alone or with people or certain surrounding, and I expend energy being an extrovert. Instead of, I think some people recharge by going out and being with others, and then they spend their energy being alone. So to me, it's not one side or the other of the coin. It's both. I'm a shy person that likes to talk to people. You know, I'm a Southern boy that lived in the North. So
He's super good at asking questions and listening. One of my favorite things that he ever told me about when we were dating is he went on a date with this woman who was from Colombia. And he said, as soon as he saw her, he was like, oh yeah, this is not a match for me. But he made this conscious decision that he, you know, she's lived in another country. I can at least talk to her for an hour. And so he was really good about asking questions and listening. And then the challenge is that she really liked him after that. So, and he still wasn't interested. And so then it wasn't but he's just really good at making people feel at ease. I remember after our first date, he sent me a text and asked me what were 3 things that I noticed about him. And I told him that he was really peaceful to be around. He made me feel very at ease and very peaceful. And then I have some things that are a little OCD myself, I will admit. It's probably where my daughter gets it from. But if you're a nail biter, I couldn't. And if you had bad teeth, that was 2 of my pet peeves. And he had good teeth and he wasn't a nail biter, and I could tell just by looking at his hands. So I told him that those things, and he probably thought, oh, that you're
I didn't even know you.
girl.
I didn't even know you could look at somebody's nails and tell that they were a biter.
So
I
anyway.
should show you my nails on screen so you can see that I am no longer biting my nails.
I guess I didn't remember you being a no biter, Jeff. Don't tell me about that because it'll freak me out a little bit. If I think that. I have a son that is a very bad no biter, and it literally makes me almost ill if I see him doing it. It's that bad for me. So it's kind of a quirky thing, but
yeah, back to that. That to me is the misnomer of saying we don't fight. Well, no, we don't fight, but we disagree. We just come to different methods of resolution without.
And instead of calling it an argument, you call it a debate.
A discussion.
Discussion. We don't even call it a debate.
I don't call it an argument because I think other people have a negative connotation of argument. I think argument by definition just means presenting your case. That's your argument. My argument is this is the way it should be interpreted, and this is the angle it should be looked at. And someone else says, no, look at it from this angle.
So
Which is more of a debate way of seeing it.
It is.
What you're saying, it sounds like, is you present your different opinions or points of view on whatever the issue is, but you're not personalizing it. You're not being upset at the other person for disagreeing.
Not even if it's their belief. Even if it's their belief, you don't need to make it personal. You still just present it as, well, I see it this way. And then I think we both very well try to take the other person's view and see if we see it from there and try to understand it. And I think you come up with a much better solution without the negative results of some people's definition of compromise. Some people's definition of compromise is you will both equally be unhappy. And
Right.
I don't think that should be the definition of compromise. I think the
Which is
definition.
also often what happens with divorce mediation.
Yes.
It's exactly. I had my attorney and just said, look, a judge is only his only goal is to make you both equally unhappy. Don't think you're going to go there and get what you want. You're going to go
Fair.
there and get an equal amount of unhappiness.
I mean,
and
that's a fair description of
Yeah.
how it works. But yeah, no, I really like that. And we usually call what you're talking about seeing the element of truth.
Mhm.
When you're trying to understand your partner, you're trying to find the element of truth in what they're saying, even if it's not something you've considered before.
I think so. One of the things too that I would tell you that I've always recognized about Trace, and it makes it really easy for us to get along, is that he's very wise. And when you think about what that means, there's people can be intelligent, they can be smart, but wisdom is a different thing, because wisdom is the ability to discern those elements of truth that are fundamental truths. And I know that when I listen to him discuss a topic, I know that it's always coming from an element of wisdom. And so it's easy to accept what he's telling me. I also can accept that his intentions towards me are very pure. Like I absolutely am confident and can unequivocally say that he never does anything that he doesn't think is in my best interest, and never says anything that isn't in my best interest. And knowing that, and I cannot say that about my previous husband. I don't feel that that was necessarily the truth, and it doesn't make him good or bad. It just means that that wasn't true about him, but I know it about Trace. And so when we
That
just
almost seems like a value of loyalty too, within the marriage. I'm not just I'm faithful to you, but I will always care about what's best
Mhm.
in any given situation. I'm showing it by my actions.
And I would say that is true too. And I can also say that that is what is behind what I do too, is I would never want to do anything that would hurt him or disappoint him or make him uncomfortable or anything like that.
No, and with enough history of how we behaved in discussions, debates, and whatnot, I know if she ever said anything that, quote, hurt my feelings, it was an accident. It was not an attempt for submission.
You know what? I was listening to a podcast by Jennifer Finlayson Fife today where she said there's a difference between hurting each other and hurting feelings.
Mhm.
And I think the way she differentiated that was sometimes we have to say something that's going to hurt feelings, but when it's in your best interest and you know it, that's not hurtful. Does that make sense? Like sometimes we have to say hard truths.
Yes.
No, I agree. Lying to someone is rarely the best option. So if you asked, does my breath smell bad? If the answer is yes, it doesn't. But I'm just saying, but if you need to tell them it does, you're not telling them their breath smells bad because you want to go na 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 na. Your breath smells bad. You're like, hey, I don't want you to interact with somebody else and have them smell your breath. So sometimes you have to tell people that their breath smells bad or that something's wrong or something doesn't look good on you.
Well, and it's when and is powerful instead of but. Like you could say, I love you, but your breath stinks. And then you're like, oh, so you don't really love me? Like it makes you question what happened before, right?
Mhm.
I love you. And right now you could use
Brush your teeth. Yeah.
like the and is powerful because it doesn't then discount the love. The love is the thing that's like there. And I'm going to say hard things sometimes, like, or, things that might hurt your feelings a little bit, but like, it's the truth. Like Trace was saying, yeah, truth is important.
I mean, I tell Cathy, and I hope she believes it all the time, I never want to win at your expense. Because I think if you win at your spouse's expense, you lose. I mean,
Yeah,
you might win the battle, but you were losing the war.
Right.
And I think that's another thing. If you have trust in that regard in each other, that, hey, this person doesn't want to take advantage of me. They don't want to do things that would hurt me. even if they do sometimes by accident, like Trace said, it was a mistake or an accident or whatever. If you basically have that belief, you can, you're gonna get through situations that you wouldn't otherwise.
There's a marriage therapist I know who says the most important, sorry,
No problem.
the most important, one of the most important factors in communication is assuming good intent.
Mhm.
Like that's like the number one rule in good communication between couples is assuming good intent. And it's something I think about a lot. I'm not perfect at it, but it's something I ponder a lot when we're conversing, because whenever we assume our partner's trying to hurt us or that they're being insensitive, I think that's when a fight is we're more at risk for fighting, more at risk for getting defensive and rude and potentially disrespectful, is when we're feeling hurt. And
Right.
we can prevent a lot of hurt feelings by assuming good intent on their part, that like, oh, they're not trying to hurt me.
You know what that is making me think of? So this is one thing that I have never felt like I'm in competition with my husband ever. When you think about competition, that means that there's a forced choice somewhere. And I have never felt like anything with my husband is a competition. We are a united front. And because there's not competition between us, I don't have to question intent or anything of the like, because I know that we're united in our effort together. And I do think that that is probably the number one reason why we haven't had a fight, an argument per se, is because we don't have competition between us at all. And I can't say that I've ever had that. And even when you think about your relationships with your siblings, there's an element of competition there, right? It's why you can have disagreements between siblings and things like that. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make in marriage is that they bring that element of almost a sibling rivalry into the marriage, and then it creates an atmosphere for disharmony, and we've just never had that. And so I think that has been probably the primary ingredient, is that there's no competition here. It's just, we are united front in everything.
That's wonderful. I was thinking about the word or even the concept of competition, and how it's really kind of almost, I want to say it's not usually accurate. Like if we start treating each other like we're at odds because somehow one of us needs to be a winner, like our ideas are in competition, and instead of remembering, oh, we're married, like we're on the same team here, we're always on the same team. It's kind of the same idea, but like kind of in reverse, is that if you start thinking there is a competition, you're no longer that team. Like, oh, like we forgot we're married, and that everything that we do is really to our detriment or for our betterment together.
We had this little disagreement recently where, and most of our audience knows, I don't know if you guys know, but Cathy's best friend since high school died a little over a month ago. And it's been a difficult thing, as you would expect.
Well, at the time of this recording, I'm not sure exactly when this will air, but she died September 6th of 2023. Anyway,
we had this discussion, and it never got out of hand or anything, but there were some feelings. And I remember saying to her, you were really there for me when Henry died, and you were my rock. And I really want to be the same for you. And she said, kind of just very matter-of-factly, well, in the wake of Henry's death, whenever there was a problem, I just kind of let you win. And I don't think she literally meant, one of us had to win and the other one had to lose. It was more like I was trying to, help you not to have to deal with more than you could deal with.
I think that's being tender with each other.
And that's how I took it. And I'm like, you know what, I can give on this. It's not that important. Let's let you win for now. And, and so it wasn't like really, I think I could see that as manipulation in a way. If she was saying, well, when Henry died, I always let you have your way and I was nice to you. And there was none of that. It was really just, I kind of need you to give me grace right now.
Yeah, I think that's more what it was.
And I think it was straightforward and honest enough that it wasn't like she was saying, well, my will should prevail over yours because I'm better and smarter. And it was nothing like that. It was like, please
Like, cut me a break right
cut me
now.
a break.
Well,
Give me
all
some
change, all change doesn't need to happen when you immediately find it.
Right.
So the fact that she says, well, we don't need to change this now. If that's what you want to do right now, do it. We don't need to change our procedure, change how we're going to address it. It's so really, she just said, we don't need to address it right now. We don't need to review it,
Yeah, there's a lot of things I've been putting off because when you're dealing with grief, it's too much.
So that made me think about, so one of my oft repeated phrases is this the hill I want to die on? And I use that phrase always when I'm dealing with, when I still had minor children at home. My youngest is now graduated high school. So there is officially no unresolved business between myself and my children's dad. And it's pretty freeing feeling when you get to that point, I will say. But even when I was dealing with situations that would arise with him, I would ask myself, there would be times where I'd be pretty hot and bothered and pretty mad, but I would just try to ask myself, is this the hill I want to die on? And I had to literally be sincere with myself about how big an issue this could end up being. And if I was going to have to die on this hill, would I be okay with that? And there were a lot of times where I just say, no, it's not worth it. And I would let it go because it was just easier and more important to keep the peace. And I think sometimes that's what people forget about in divorce, is the importance of keeping the peace for your children's peace of mind. And that wasn't always my gut reaction when I was more newly divorced. But as I got, better at the whole thing, I think we got to that point where that was the reaction. I also think part of the other thing that tends to lead to conflict. Sorry about our dog. Remus, stop. Sorry, dog.
I'm not hearing him, but
okay, he's being obnoxious. Anyway, so one of the things that we also decided early on is that it was my job to manage my people and his job to manage his people. So I didn't deal with his ex-wife and he didn't deal with my ex-husband. And I think that allowed there to be peaceful existence between him and my ex-husband, who actually really likes him and expresses it often. And I feel like
you pose for pictures with my ex-wife and do crafts for the
oh, we've got that too.
Yeah. And so it wasn't always that way, but we are at that space right now where we, just went out to Indiana for his youngest daughter's 18th birthday. She's a senior in high school. And we went to dinner with his ex-wife and her husband and his daughter and son, and all pose for pictures together and can give each other hugs and express appreciation for each other. And so I think that's one of the things that's important as well. And I think sometimes when you enter into a remarriage situation, that there can be competition for resources in some ways. Like I can remember one of my dad's wives being literally jealous of my dad doing anything for his daughters. Like he was not allowed to spend money on us hardly at all. And I always felt like that was a little bit strange. And again, it goes back to that whole thing of competition, that my stepmom was competing with me. And we've never had that we've never put ourselves in competition either with each other, with former spouses, or even with each other's children. We've given each other the freedom to do for our kids as that person saw fit. And
it seems like what you're saying is that in addition to coming in and being gentle with any kind of correction when you're a new step parent, you
Mhm.
also come into the picture and leave it to the person who was married to the former spouse to deal with that former spouse, so that potentially that gains trust and camaraderie and goodness between the new person and the new kids and the new former.
Yes.
I wasn't married to him. I don't have an issue with him. I don't have any contractual, any legal, anything with the man.
Right.
And vice versa. So to think, I may have married the person who has contractual obligations with him, and so I can help them fulfill their obligations, but I don't have the obligations. So we would.
So either you communicate
So-
because you want to and it's good, or you just don't.
Right. Well, and then the other thing that we did too, and we discussed this early on and had unity in this feeling with each other, is that once you're divorced, the only issues of business between you and your former spouse is the religion of minor children, the schooling of minor children, and the health of minor children, and then, like pick up and drop off, those types of things. But whether or not that person was a crappy husband or a crappy wife, or you were a crappy husband or a crappy wife, was resolved by the beauty of divorce. So get over that part. Don't rehash that stuff anymore.
Yeah,
Move
there's
on.
nothing to gain.
And deal with the business of what's best for these children. Parents make all these decisions that mess up their kids' lives, and then they have the nerve to be, outraged when these kids misbehave. And they aggravate that by having contentious divorce situations after the fact that their kids are drawn into, and then their kids feel responsible for, and then they lose self-esteem over, they feel shame over, when it's not even their own actions. But that's the feelings we project onto our kids if we're not careful. And we both had a very clear view that we did not want that for our kids. And
the only thing worse than a high conflict marriage is a high conflict divorce.
yes, yeah.
So
really the only way to make divorce good for your kids is to figure out how to get along.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do then if you have a high if you can't get over your feelings of animosity toward your spouse? I suggest what Trace did. You go to a counselor and work through it. Don't go to your former spouse and try to get apologies or recognitions that they were wrong or any of that kind of stuff. That's only going to make things worse, not better. The problem when you're feeling that angst is not outside of you, it's inside of you. And so go to a therapist and get help. And if you can't afford it because you're a broke single mom or whatever, talk to your bishop, that you can figure something out.
There's also some really, really great books. So one of the best books that I read after my divorce is one called Divorce Poison by Richard Warshak. And he really talks about the things that you have to be careful about in divorce. And I remember the moment where it was my most aha moment for myself of I had really made a big mistake. Was my youngest son had come to me. He did not want to go to his dad's. He was having a really challenging time with his dad. And at first I had said, okay, well, we'll just tell your dad that you don't feel good, that you're sick and you don't have to go. And then I read this chapter in the book that talked about that you shouldn't ever encourage your kids to lie to their other parents ever. And I went to Riley and I said, hey, I'm really sorry that I said that we could do that. That was wrong of me. I shouldn't discourage you from having open communication with your dad. Let's have a conversation with your dad about how you're feeling. And he was really fearful about it and he didn't want to do it. But he did do it. And it didn't go as good for him as he hoped it would go. But I think it led him later to be able to have better conversations with his dad. And one of the things that I think you get really tempted to do in divorce is to become the broker of your children's relationship with their other parent. And you have to really choose actively that you're not going to do that, that you are going to let them define their own relationship with their other parent, that is between that child and that parent and not between you and them anymore, because you guys are separate now. And I think it's even more important that you do that when the children become adults, that you have to take the step back and really own that you are not the broker of this relationship. It is their responsibility and to get out of the way.
Right. I think that's really wise counsel. Here's a thing I want to throw out to you guys, and this goes to the nut of a lot of what we're hoping to talk about today. But a lot of these issues revolve around it. And I think this is where a big part of the challenge comes in the effort to be able to resolve differences without fighting, as we've defined it here. I think that one of the biggest challenges we've seen both in working with mid-singles and in being mid-singles our own selves is trauma from the past. And I remember, if I can say this without being too personal, when Karen was considering marriage to Trace, I remember a third friend of ours and myself giving her a blessing, because of fears over getting married and things. I know I had blessings over that too when I was contemplating marrying Cathy and a couple of other people, actually. So, but I think I had fears because I had been hurt in past relationships. I had relationships that were, toxic, and I wondered if it was me that caused that. If it was, had I progressed enough to avoid that in the future? And Karen knew me when I was pretty newly divorced and knew what a mess I was. So I know that, like, when I was dating Cathy, there was a time, it's in our book, where she asked me to come over on a Friday night where I happened to be in the town where she was living. And she asked me to come over, and I met her kids for the first time that night. And we spent about 5 hours together. But on my way out, when she's canceling our breakfast that we had scheduled for the next morning, because she didn't want to be up late and then get up early on a weekend when she had care of her children, I felt triggered by it. I was like, I'm being rejected now. I mean, it wasn't rational. I understood that fairly soon after that. But I spent 3/4 of the way to my brother's house where I was staying that night thinking of how to break up with her. Preemptive breakup, like, well, it
Let's
wasn't.
not get hurt. Let's end the relationship before it can get ended.
Right. And so it wasn't that I didn't like her or that I didn't care about her, but trust her was a whole other thing. And it wasn't that she wasn't trustworthy either. It was more like I didn't trust her not to hurt me. I thought, it's my brain being overprotective, saying, get out now because she's going to abandon you. She's going to
extent.
check
I feel
out.
like we still have to watch ourselves not to feel rejection within our marriage because of rejection we felt in the past. Did you guys ever have any kind of lingering feelings of, I don't know, I mean, even we've done a lot of personal work, but we still have to remind ourselves, okay, this is different. This is a different relationship.
And just to give one more quick one, like, there was a time I put my arms around Cathy when she was full of weepy tears because she knew I was changing our password at the bank. And she had financial issues before. And
It
so
was triggering.
It was triggering. And
I knew that's what it was, but it didn't stop the emotion.
I put my arms around her and said, what are you afraid of? I was going to share with her the password. I just got an email that said I needed to change it. So I was doing that. And so she got worked up and triggered over nothing. And I did too. I mean, in the example I gave,
Do you
And
guys
there's-
ever get triggered?
I will have to say I don't. And there's a reason why I don't. And it's because of something that happened very early in it was right after we were engaged. I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And
Ah.
it was literally like maybe 2 weeks after we were engaged. And I tried to give Trace back the ring and told him he didn't have to marry me.
And he wouldn't take it.
And he would not take it. And I knew after that I was in a very safe place, and I've never doubted it ever since. And so I have to say, I can understand you being there, and because I probably was pretty triggered in that moment myself, but he just made me feel so safe. I haven't ever felt that way again. And I will also say the other experience, I mean, I have some pretty big health challenges, and he knew it going in. I think in the first 2 years we were married, I had surgery 4 times, major surgery. And I've had several more since then. I had one in, was it 2019, where it went badly and I almost died. And he had left me at the surgical center, and then they had actually said he could take me home, but he didn't feel good about it and said, no, we paid for her to stay the night, so we want her to go ahead and stay the night. And they ended up calling him within the hour, telling him that they were taking me by ambulance to Utah Valley because my blood pressure had dropped to 60/26, which is dead for most people.
That was a
And
good call.
I was internally
Stay there,
waiting,
huh?
and they had to open me back up and correct the problem. But I was pretty sure I was going to die. When you hear your surgeon say, I think she's going to die, it's a very heartening moment. And I remember praying really hard that I wouldn't die, because I had this one little girl that was still not raised, and I needed to raise her, and begging for my life for that reason. But I also saw very clearly in that moment, and maybe this will get a little bit weird to some people, but I had a very clear vision that this was my person. As Jeff mentioned, he just is. And because of that, I don't ever feel triggered. I don't know if you ever feel triggered, but I never do anymore.
Lots of things are trigger, but trigger's not negative. Trigger's just telling you got something to address.
Right.
It's only
It's coming up
It's
because
only-
it's ready to be healed. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
It's a trauma that's coming up.
and airing it out with somebody that you can trust, and somebody who won't judge you negatively for being triggered. Trigger's just it's an old habit. So you're just trying to create new habits. Well, to get rid of the old habit, you got to literally replace it with a new habit. So you air out whatever triggered you, put it on the table, look at it from a lot of different angles, decide what you're going to keep, decide what you're going to get rid of, and what you're going to replace it with, so that whenever that triggers, I now get a new response. I get a new subroutine. I get new programming. And so triggering, yeah, any new situation you get triggered, but it's what you do with it matters more than, it doesn't have to trigger a bomb. It doesn't have to trigger a gun. You just air it out, figure out what's good and bad with it, what works and doesn't work in this situation. And it may have worked or didn't work in a previous situation.
Right.
Keep what you like, throw away what you don't like, put in
Oh,
something else.
I really love what you're saying. And I think it's something that a lot of people are going to relate with. Because I think most people who remarry do have triggers. I can see
Sure.
why Karen had some special circumstances that allowed her to not feel them so much. Because you felt assurance in very unique ways.
Yeah.
But I love that you're saying it's not something we need to be scared of. It's an old habit. It's an old programming.
An old subroutine.
Yeah. And we
Rewrite
can replace it what we don't is no longer useful with something more useful, together with the safety of your new partner. Like, I love that. And I really think maybe that's a big key. I mean, I've been highlighting in my notes things that you've said so far. And as we kind of wrap up this conversation, I kind of want to touch on them really quick and see if there's anything you'd like to add to it. But I have.
Let me say something more about triggers real quick.
Oh, yeah.
We teach a lot. We teach when we go out and speak and stuff. If you can name it, you can tame it. So in other words, if you understand that it's a trigger and it's not this other person doing something to you, or it's not, we've even heard this one, the Holy Ghost telling you to get out. If you can understand, okay, this is a trauma that's being triggered, and if you can know that, and even know when you might need a little space to calm down, then you can come and air it out in a way that is peaceful and not, I'm taking out and venting all my frustration on you. If you understand what it is that you're experiencing,
Yeah,
I think
it's taking emotional accountability for oneself.
that goes a long way.
Instead of putting it on your partner.
And that's something we've had to learn too.
Yeah, not you triggered me, but I'm feeling triggered by this interaction because of something I've experienced, and I'm responsible for this.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then I think the other thing is sometimes you have to be wise enough, even in a moment where you're feeling triggered, to know this might not be the moment I can air this out, but it's telling me that I need to at some point. And
I
so,
will just want to add to that. Another thing that I consciously made a decision about, and again, this was through reading some really good books post-divorce, was that I never was going to give my previous relationship that power over me to challenge or create a problem in my new one. I consciously chose to not let it have that power anymore. And so if maybe I was feeling anxiety over something, I would stop and think to myself, I'm going to take back my power and not allow it to take me in that spot, because this is a different person. This is not somebody who should be punished for the perceived sins of the previous partner. And I
love how you put that, the perceived sins.
Yes, right. Because your perception is your reality, right? And from their side, they might not view it as that they wronged you, right? And so whether or not it's true or not is irrelevant. If it's my perception of what happened, then that's going to be the reality for me. And I don't want to give that power to that old relationship to dictate the terms of my new relationship. And so I consciously chose to put that roadblock up and say, no, you're not going to have that power over me anymore. I allowed that for long enough, and it's a new day.
Yeah, and friends in our audience, I want to emphasize that she said it is a choice. And that's why we called our book Intentional Courtship, because you want to intentionally court the kind of person you want to marry in an intentional way. And
make conscious decisions.
Make conscious decisions when you get married that you're going to be married in an intentional way. Because if you govern your relationship you can govern it with intention, or you can govern it with emotion. And I guarantee you, with all the trauma there is out there, if you govern it with emotion, it's going to be a hot mess.
Yes.
So,
which is why a lot of subsequent marriages do often not work out. Statistically, they're higher risk. However, we believe that intention is what creates our best chance of not just getting divorced again, but actually having a better marital experience, which you clearly are having with each other, which is awesome. In fact, there's really something so inspiring to me seeing or witnessing that kind of restoration, that kind of redemption, really in marriage, to be able to have a really strong second or third marriage that after having the trial of having to learn the hard way about what you don't want from previous partners, and or even what you don't like about how you showed up in those relationships, which ultimately is where you have the most control, is how am I going to show up different in this one, make conscious choices. And what Jeff was saying about governing relationships not with emotion but with intention is we did an episode on LilyPod, our podcast platform, about divorce proofing marriage, and for us, taking that emotional accountability for oneself. And if I'm feeling triggered, if I'm feeling emotionally flooded and overwhelmed, I love what Trace said about it not having to be a bad thing, but a recognition of what is happening in me. And when I recognize that, I realize we're not going to resolve something right now. I'm not going to show up and be intellectually conversing. I'm going to be doing damage right now. So we're going to like take a pause, and we'll come back and we'll resolve things when we're peaceful. Because that's one thing you mentioned that I highlighted, is that you feel really at ease with Trace, and that he has a peaceful countenance, and not
which is pretty obvious, actually.
Well, and some people are blessed with that gift, and some people are more feisty. And I would say Jeff and I are both more feisty. So we've got that quality of like, we're both strong-willed, which makes it so that we have to be in a place of peace in order to have productive conversations and not fight.
But I mean, we could fight all night. I mean, we have it in us to do that.
Yeah,
but we never do.
Certainly cannot say that we've never had a fight.
Even
the way you define it, but when we honor our agreements that we outline in the preventing divorce, divorce proofing your marriage. What we talk about in that episode, specifically with how we do that, is what prevents us from having those fights. So I would say we don't fight now, but I can't say we've never had one.
Well, I'll let you know that if we do ever have a fight, I can tell you for the record, it will be my fault. I will own that up front. And I have said this for 8 years, because we've been together 8 years. And I will say this until we die, that if we ever do, it's my fault, and I'm sorry.
No.
Does that help prevent it, you think?
I don't know. It's become kind of a joke now, you know, that we haven't had one, and maybe we should start one just to see how it goes.
I think you're on a great streak.
I like our way better.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I am feisty and he's really peaceful, but he can calm me down, like just with his demeanor and his presence. And if I wasn't calm over something, I instantly am when he is near me. Just something about him. I don't know what it is, but he has it.
Trust. It's obvious that's what it is.
Yes.
It's what?
Trust.
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 Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
Because partly it's your decision to trust him. Trust sometimes is a policy. Because I know there were times, like I described earlier, where I didn't trust Cathy, even though she was trustworthy. And so I think that's part of it. You have to be able to walk into that room and affirmatively, intentionally decide, I'm going to trust them. Part of it is if they're willing to be a safe place for you. And that's what we're working on in our relationship too, to be that safe place for each other. And then for both of us to be willing to go out on the limb and say, I trust you. And I do trust her. I think she does trust me, but it's always a work in progress for us. You know, we're always trying to do that better than we've done it in the past. And to me, that's what it seems like you guys have.
So you naturally have the peaceful. Jeff and I have to really work at it, because, you know, we got the double feisty over here. And, you know, some people listening might end up with that, you know, two strong-willed people getting together. And that doesn't mean it can't work. It just means you have to be responsible for your own emotions, your own triggers, your own stuff. And but I love what you said about, replacing old habits, old triggers with what serves your relationship better now in that safety. And I love what you said about being united and not in competition with each other, because I really think whenever we're trying to be in competition with a teammate, it's like we're forgetting we're on the same team.
Competition means winner and loser.
Right.
Mhm.
How can you win? How can somebody win and somebody lose if you're on the same team?
Yeah, exactly.
both-
It's like
you
it's a
both win or both
misunderstanding to even think that way.
Yeah.
It's a misnomer.
Yeah. And then I also really love what you said about wisdom being part of why you don't fight, that discerning elements of truth. And I can see how you've both done work in that regard and made intentional choices about how you're showing up now. And that wisdom has led to, a peaceful interaction between you. And then the pure heart. I love that too. Like the pure heart of like always having the best interest of your partner. And then also believing your partner has that best interest is huge, I think, in keeping away from the fighting. I did have one I love also what Karen said about some things just aren't worth the energy. Like there's some things just aren't worth it. And I think that goes pretty well with what Trace said earlier about I'm never going to hate someone. It's not worth like the energy it's going to suck out of me.
Can I interject one thing on that point you're making right there?
Yeah.
So John and Julie Gottman, I don't know if you guys have heard of them. They're these big marriage researchers, some of the most prominent ones in the world. But they came up with things like you have a 0% chance of resolving something in the same discussion when somebody's heart rate reaches over 100 beats per minute, they come up with all.
That's like the physical result of being emotionally flooded.
So anyway, but the point on this was they found, the conventional wisdom was always the two biggest things people fight over is money and sex. And these came from surveys and things. Well, the Gottmans actually observed people discussing their marriages and so forth, and they came up with a totally different conclusion. They said the biggest thing that people fight over is nothing.
I agree with that. I think so.
And
Yeah.
every fight we've ever had, which isn't a whole lot, but it's always been over nothing.
That it's really not ever about the subject that they're talking about. It's about
it's like a reversion to your childhood.
Right.
And you're no longer an adult speaking in an adult brain.
I'm afraid that you don't love me. I'm afraid that you're going to be selfish with me. I'm afraid that you're going to abandon me. It's about these tiny little things usually that reflect how you think the person really feels about you, or
which is why I've heard therapists ask, like, how old do you feel? If you feel like an adult, you can probably have the conversation, just like what Karen said about her kids, like adults have adult conversations. Well, I think it's the same thing if we are like reverting to our child minds because of that emotional upheaval in us, then we're probably not ready for adult conversations.
I remember my personal therapist talking to her about, early in our marriage when Cathy was dealing with some serious health problems, and she would kind of, be very agitated and, on the edge sometimes. And she just told me, you know what, don't think of her as this really unreasonable, 38-year-old woman. Think of her as a 4-year-old girl. What would you do? And sometimes that's usually the best part. Thing.
Oh yeah, when he shows up, like for my 4-year-old self, like because that's who I'm being at the moment, I'm like, oh, I feel really like sheltered and cared for. Right?
I just run my fingers through her hair or something, and hey, honey, it's okay. It's going to be all right.
That's the same thing for you too.
Absolutely. And Dr. Greg Bear said to us, it's kind of almost like putting a bottle in my mouth if you want to be really primitive. But I mean,
I saw Karen was going to say something about this.
We did have some really, really frank discussions once we got engaged, and we we did have frank discussions about how we were going to be married. I think people get caught up in the wedding and they always plan weddings, but they never plan marriages. But we planned our marriage very intentionally. We read multiple books together. We read one by Gary Chapman, which is Things I Wished I'd Known Before We Got Married. Very, very good. Highly recommend it. We discussed it deeply. We both had already read the 5 love languages, and we knew and understood each other's love languages really well. But then another one that I recommend is the 5 apology languages. So we had to learn what each other's apology language is, which even though we've never had a fight per se, it doesn't mean we've never said I'm sorry for something.
True.
And so just knowing and being concerned about each other from those perspectives was really
What's the name
helpful.
of that book again?
The 5
Apology
apology
languages.
language. It's by Gary Chapman as well. He wrote the 5 love languages. All 3 of those are by him. And then the other activity that we did, and we did it twice while we were dating, once before we got engaged, and then again right before we got married. There's this New York Times article about the 36 questions that any 2 people could ask that you supposedly will fall in love. And the idea about it is that if you're not going to have the potential to fall in love, you won't make it through the 36 questions. But we did that with each other twice, and we learned a lot of really good things about each other through those exercises. And so by the time we finally decided that we were going to get married, we had done the work to know that we would be successful up front. We had the hard discussions about sex, marriage, and raising kids that you would need to have before you got married. And we had honest and frank discussions with each other.
So that 9 months was very purposeful.
It was very purposeful.
Yeah. And what are those how would people find that 36 questions?
If you just Google 36 questions that
pretty
lead to love, it will come up like that. It was in the New York Times originally, but I just recently set Trace's sister up with a friend of mine, and they just got engaged, literally a few days ago. And I had sent them that, and I am looking forward to hearing if they have done it. But I think it's a really interesting exercise. The hardest part about it is at the end, you have to stare into each other's eyes for 4 minutes straight, and you can't talk. And it sounds kind of corny, but it is really an interesting thing because it's very uncomfortable. Even though this is this person that you love, and you're like, when you're early in your relationship, there's lots of raging hormones and all those types of
getting naked and having sex is probably easier.
It would have been probably than that would have been. That was actually quite hard for me. I had a hard time with it, but after you do it once, it's like, oh, he's seen everything. He sees right through me. He stared in my eyes for 4 straight minutes. So there's no hiding anything anymore. So I thought that was a really good exercise.
Can you blink?
You can blink.
Like
yeah, you can blink.
Just no talking, no looking away.
No looking away. Yeah. And it's hard.
I mean, when you actually look at someone, you actually look at them for less than a few seconds at a time, traditionally. And then you actually look somewhere else for a second, or you look down, or you look up. It literally forces you to make eye contact with another person. It's almost, if you saw someone in a room and you saw each other, somebody's supposed to look away within like 4 seconds. 10 seconds of staring at a stranger, you're like, weirdo. So it's a huge magnification of that you literally sit and stare into their eyes for 4 minutes with a timer, 4 minutes straight.
It was the longest 4 minutes I've ever had in my life.
It's kind of weird. Someone that you literally could have made out with for 20 minutes, staring just into their eyes, it was weirder.
Yeah.
But let me say this too, because I think she spoke about Jennifer Finlayson Fife a minute ago. But there's 2 things about that. Number one, I think if there's a question you're afraid to ask the person you're thinking about marrying, that's the question you need to ask. If there's a subject you're afraid to cover, if there's something in your past you're afraid to admit, I was into porn at one point, whatever it is, that's the thing you need to tell them.
Because otherwise it will always be something you wonder if they'd accept about you. and there's something between you.
Now, I mean, I told Cathy on our first date, you guys may have heard me say this, but I don't think I've said it to you directly.
Like a barrier, like it's a barrier. Yeah.
But on our very first date, I told her that I had just been divorced for the second time, like a month ago, that I had just been laid off from my corporate job out in Houston, Texas, and that I had moved out to Utah, and with hardly a buck to my name, that I was building a business, but it wasn't making any money yet. And that I was couch surfing at my parents' because I couldn't afford my life. And by the way, I was 48 years old at the time. So I told her all this on the first date, and she said that, and I said, if anything is going to come of this, it's going to take a little while because I've got to get my life together. And that wasn't necessarily easy for me to do. But I could have done what people usually do and tried to make myself look better in that situation than it really was. But the fact that she knew all that about me and we kept getting to know each other meant something.
And it sounds like with the 36 questions, you were trying to be transparent with each other.
So I like a different term better. I like full disclosure. Because I think transparent means different things to different people. And some people think they're being transparent, but they're holding back.
They're being withholding, yeah.
Yeah. And
I won't lie to you, but if you don't ask, I won't tell you.
Yeah. So I like full disclosure better. And that's a term that I'm actually big on with even my work now. That is a term you will hear out of my mouth at least once a day, every day at work, would you say?
I agree.
He works with me now.
And I'll tell
What
you.
do you guys do?
We work for a luxury custom home building and renovation company.
Okay.
And Karen's good at making money. Super good at making money. But I'll tell you this too. My life has totally changed since I met Cathy, financially, in every other way. And part of my motivation, honestly, as I look back at that moment when I told her what a loser I was, I'm sort of kidding about that, but I look back to that moment and I think she gave me a chance when it wasn't the bigger, better deal. And so I wanted it to be the bigger, better deal. Not that she insisted on that, but she deserved it. So anyway, I think, well, the other thing I was going to say on that subject was Jennifer Finlayson 5 points out, and Laura Brotherson does too, that the biblical word for sex is to know. You know, Adam knew his wife and they conceived and bare a son named Seth or whatever.
I think full disclosure and that purposeful getting to know you in all the different ways you did before marriage, that just makes intimacy so much better.
And that's what Jennifer Finlayson 5 says, is that what makes sex really lovemaking instead of just sex is the knowing aspect of it. It's being able to look at that person for all the things you really love and for all that you know about them, and to feel that connection.
And applying all the beautiful, wonderful things you've said about being married without fighting is kind of this underlying sense of knowing each other very fully and being accepted. Like being accepting and being accepted. That's really kind of the foundation, right? That's what creates the safety, the goodness.
Sure.
And it's ironic because the risk that you took in the beginning creates the safety later.
Yeah.
In the full disclosure and all of that.
So I have one final question. Because I had this like burning question since before we got on with you, is how you would define the difference between conflict and contention. Like, would you, because we haven't really used those words yet. You defined fight and you defined argument and debate and intellectual conversation, but can you define conflict and contention?
Without,
just your own definition. It doesn't.
without looking at too hard. to a conflict means you think you should go two different ways. Contention is your method of trying to get your way. That it's mean. You're not.
There's negative emotion.
Well, it's a negative. A conflict means, oh, I think that's the way home. I think that's the way home. I can either go my direction home by dragging you, or we can discuss it and look for truth. If you have a conflict and you're not honestly looking for what's right, you're just looking to win, then you're fighting. You've got contention. Your
So
goal
contention
is
is how you compare the fighting. Like you'd say those are kind of synonymous, and that's just
contention's way more
with
negative.
rudeness.
Contention's way more negative to me. That the means of winning is just, I just got to win. It's not looking for truth. It's not looking for what's right. A conflict is two people think two different things are right. And now you just got to figure out what is right for y'all.
So for you, conflict is more like an argument, presenting my case, you present your case, and we figure out what's right.
With the intention of finding out what works. I mean, I can't even say that if this is wrong, it's just one way of doing it. And this is one way of doing it. Okay, how are we going to do it? Maybe we do it this way. Maybe we do it your way. Maybe we do it this way.
Maybe there's a third way we come up with together.
Right, in a totally different direction. Not this way, not that way, but up works for us.
Something I've pondered through the years is that men and women are different. They come together and they offer unique qualities. And in doing so, conflicts without contention to me is kind of like having an intellectual conversation or debate without fighting. It's like
Fighting,
right. And it leads to, you have a point of view and I have a point of view, and together it's probably a better point of view.
I was thinking of disagreeing without being disagreeable. So you can disagree, meaning that you have two competing interests, but it doesn't mean you have to compete with each other. Just because the interest maybe your interests are somewhat mutually exclusive, your role as a husband and wife should never be mutually exclusive.
Staying united while having differences of opinion.
Yeah, I like that. Staying united while being maybe having a difference of opinion. I like how that goes.
Yeah.
Like, we know at the end of this discussion, however it turns out, we're still going to be together. We're still going to love each other. The fundamentals are still
yes.
solid.
In fact, we were in I wouldn't say we were in a fight. We were in a timeout, really. And there's always like kind of, I don't know, it feels a little discordant, not that we're fighting, but because it's like not resolved yet, right? And when we were not resolved yet, one of our kids said, are you guys okay? Are you gonna get divorced or something like that? Like, and it's not because we'd had like a big fight, but they could tell something was off, like we weren't our normal communication. And Jeff assured them, like, no, we're good. I mean, we always work things out and we will work things out. And I remember feeling assurance.
I just said that's what we do.
Yeah.
We have a disagreement. We figure it out. We love each other. We're going to continue.
And I
That's
think
what we
I
do.
really like, even though our kid needed to hear that, so did I, like, I think it was, and I think just hearing it once kind of helped me apply it in the future. Like, kind of like what you've said with, that one moment when he's like, I'm not taking back the ring. I'm in this. Like that, sometimes that can really kind of have that ripple effect on all of your communication.
That was the moment I knew I was in a safe place.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, is there any last words you'd like to share before we end?
Anything you were hoping to say that hadn't had a chance to?
Love you, babe.
Love you, sweetie.
And I will say, I really sense that from these two, that they've found what they're looking for, and it's a beautiful thing. I want to just make the point that I made at the beginning, that when I hear a couple say we've never had a fight, I'm always a little nervous. I want to say, which one of you's the boss then? Or,
Yes.
what is it you're holding back until the ring is on their finger? Or,
Well,
you
but
know,
they've been married 7 or 8 years.
what is it you're
That is a
sweeping
long
under the rug?
time.
Now, I'm getting there. What I'm saying is, I don't think they're saying we've never disagreed. I don't think they're saying
Oh,
we have never had a discussion where we didn't see eye to eye. I think what
Or
they're
had a little bit of hurt feelings,
right.
even though we feel safe overall, but sometimes we have feelings.
I think what they're saying is we have had disagreements. We have not had fights.
right.
Correct.
And I want to say, like with Karen prospectively taking responsibility for any future fights. I hope I can say this. Her maiden name is McGee and she's Irish. And
I'm Scottish. That's a dangerous combo.
But I also think, and she's described herself as feisty, but I also think they've found a way to have disagreements without being disagreeable, to not see eye to eye on something and still love each other and talk through the difficult subjects that can come up in every marriage, and to ultimately put the relationship ahead of the specific problem. And so I think this is an episode worth listening to more than once. It's kind of one of our longer ones, but go back and listen to it again and think about it. And really, if you're a mid-single out there, take some hope that even if you have, a tendency to be feisty, even if you have a tendency to be strong-willed and to not have the best communication, there's things you can do to make a more peaceful, loving relationship in the future.
And we'll include some of their suggestions along with what they did to get really intentional about getting married, with the 36 questions and the books that they've recommended. We'll put those in the show notes on LilyPod and LilyTube, so you can continue your own journey with whatever seemed to resonate and be able to continue on in creating either your future or current marriage to be without contention, without fighting.
Yeah, and we thank you so much for coming on, Trace and Karen, and grateful for your friendship over many years. It's really meant a lot, particularly at difficult moments in my life. And so with that, we will sign off and remind our audience that any time is a great time for more love in your life.